The soil was hard and unforgiving under the shovel blade, and Eleanor Lancaster's hands were bleeding by the time she heard the horse approaching in the darkness. She didn't stop digging, didn't turn around, just kept driving the shovel into the earth with a rhythm born of desperation and grief. The moon hung fat and silver over the Nevada desert, casting long shadows across the scrubland outside Unionville, and she had maybe 3 more feet to go before the hole would be deep enough. The horse stopped somewhere behind her. She heard boots hit the ground, heard footsteps coming closer through the sage and creosote. Still, she kept digging. If this was trouble, it would find her whether she acknowledged it or not. If it was help, well, she hadn't asked for any. That's hard work for anyone, let alone a woman alone in the middle of the night. The voice was deep, careful, neither threatening nor particularly friendly, just observational. Eleanor drove the shovel in again, leveraged up another load of dirt. Then keep riding. The footsteps came closer. She could feel him now, standing at the edge of the grave she was digging, looking down at her work. In her peripheral vision, she caught the outline of a tall man, broad-shouldered, wearing a hat that shadowed his face. A gun belt sat on his hips, and even in the moonlight she could see the worn leather of his vest, the dust of long travel on his clothes. "How deep are you planning to go?" he asked. "Deep enough." "Deep enough for what?" Eleanor finally stopped, looked up at him. His face was angular, strong-jawed, with eyes that caught the moonlight in a way that made them look almost silver. He was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar. There was something steady about him, something that suggested he'd seen his share of trouble and come through it without losing whatever it was that made a man decent. "Deep enough for a body," she said flatly. She watched his expression shift, saw him processing that information, looking at the grave with new understanding. His hand didn't move toward his gun, though. Instead, he glanced back toward where she'd left the body, wrapped in canvas and rope about 20 feet away. "That's a person under that canvas." Was a person. He was quiet for a moment, then he stepped down into the grave beside her. Before she could protest, he reached out and took the shovel from her hands. His fingers brushed hers in the transfer, and she felt the calluses there, the warmth of living skin against her cold, torn palms. "Tell me who we're burying," he said, and there was something in his voice that made it not quite a question, not quite a demand, but somewhere in between. An offer, maybe, or a promise. Eleanor climbed out of the grave, her legs shaking with exhaustion. She'd been digging for 2 hours already, and the adrenaline that had carried her this far was starting to fade, leaving behind bone-deep weariness and a grief so heavy it felt like it might pull her straight down through the earth. "My brother," she said. "Thomas Lancaster. He was 20 years old." The cowboy started digging, his movements efficient and powerful. He was making twice the progress she'd been making, the shovel biting deep into the soil with each thrust. What happened to him? Eleanor sat down hard on the ground, wrapped her arms around her knees. The story wanted to stay locked in her throat, but something about this stranger and the way he'd simply started helping made it come loose. "We came to Unionville 3 months ago," she began. "Thomas had heard there was work in the silver mines, and I had a little money saved that we thought we could use to start something. Maybe a boarding house or a restaurant, something respectable." She laughed, but it came out bitter. "Our parents died of fever back in Missouri 2 years ago. It's been just the 2 of us since then." The cowboy kept digging, but she could tell he was listening. Thomas got work at the Lucky Strike mine. The pay was decent and he was careful, always careful. But there was this man, Victor Crane, who ran one of the saloons in town. He also ran cards and loans and anything else that might turn a profit. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. Thomas never gambled, never drank much, But Crane had other ways of getting his hooks into people. What kind of ways? About a month ago, Thomas came home looking scared. Said Crane had approached him, told him he needed to do something. Wouldn't tell me what. Just said it was dangerous but necessary, and that if he didn't do it, Crane would make sure I lost my job at the hotel where I was working as a maid. Would make sure nobody in town would hire me, would spread rumors that would ruin my reputation. She swallowed hard. In a town like Unionville, a woman's reputation is about all she has. The cowboy climbed out of the grave, which was now plenty deep enough. He set the shovel aside and sat down a respectful distance from her, taking off his hat and running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. Up close, with the hat off, she could see his face more clearly. There was a scar along his jawline, faded but visible, and his eyes were actually brown, not silver, warm and intelligent. "I'm Austin Blake," he said, "and I'm sorry about your brother, Eleanor Lancaster." She looked toward the canvas-wrapped body. 2 days ago, Thomas told me he couldn't do what Crane wanted anymore. Said it was wrong, that people were getting hurt. He wouldn't give me details, but I could see he was terrified. Last night, he didn't come home from the mine. This morning, the foreman told me there'd been an accident. A tunnel collapse. They said Thomas was killed instantly. But you don't believe it was an accident. I went to see his body before they buried him in the town cemetery. They didn't want to let me, but I insisted. Eleanor's voice went flat, distant. His neck was broken, Mr. Blake. Cleanly broken, the way it would be if someone came up behind him and snapped it. There wasn't a mark on him otherwise. No crushing injuries, no rock dust in his lungs, nothing that looked like a tunnel collapse. Austin was quiet, absorbing this, and nobody else questioned it. The sheriff is in Crane's pocket. Half the town is. The other half is too scared to do anything about it. She looked at him directly. So I claimed the body, said I wanted to handle the burial myself as was proper for family. And I brought him out here because I don't want him buried in a cemetery where Crane and his men walk past every day. Thomas deserves better than that. He deserves justice. Justice? Eleanor laughed again, and this time it was even more bitter. There's no justice in Unionville, Mr. Blake. There's only survival. Austin stood up, walked over to the canvas-wrapped body. "Help me carry him over." Together they lifted Thomas Lancaster's body. He'd been a slight young man, and death had made him seem even smaller. They lowered him carefully into the grave, and Eleanor arranged the canvas so that his face was covered properly. For a long moment, she just stood there, looking down at her brother, the last of her family. "I should say something," she whispered, "but I don't know what." Austin's voice was gentle. "Say what's in your heart." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, and her voice broke. "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I didn't see what was happening until it was too late. I'm sorry you died alone and scared, and I'm sorry that the man who killed you is going to get away with it." Tears were streaming down her face now, and she didn't bother to wipe them away. "I hope wherever you are now, you're at peace. I hope you're with Mama and Papa. I hope you know I loved you and I always will." She stepped back, and Austin handed her the shovel. She threw the first shovelful of dirt into the grave, the sound of it hitting the canvas loud in the night silence. Then Austin took the shovel and began filling in the grave properly, working in that same efficient, powerful rhythm. While he worked, Eleanor gathered stones from the surrounding desert. By the time the grave was filled and mounded, she had enough rocks to build a simple cairn marker. Austin helped her stack them, and together they created something that would last, something that would mark Thomas Lancaster's final resting place. When it was done, they both stood there in silence. The night was wearing on toward morning, and the sky was starting to pale in the east. Austin's horse, a big roan gelding, stood patiently ground tied nearby, occasionally lowering his head to lip at the sparse desert grass. "What will you do now?" Austin asked finally. Eleanor looked toward Unionville, its scattered lights visible in the distance. "I don't know. Leave, I suppose. There's nothing for me here anymore." "Where will you go?" "I don't know that either." She felt hollowed out, empty. "I have a little money saved. Maybe I'll go to California. I hear there are opportunities for women there in the cities." Austin was quiet for a moment, then he said, "I'm a cattleman. Or I was, up in Montana. Spent the last 5 years working ranches up there, saved my money, learned the business. I came down here because I heard there was land available, cheap, if a man was willing to work it. I was planning to start my own spread, something small to begin with." Eleanor didn't see what this had to do with her, but she was too tired to do anything but listen. "Thing is," Austin continued, "I'm decent with cattle and horses, but I'm not much good with paperwork or planning or the kind of thinking it takes to run a business properly. I can work from dawn to dusk. I can build and mend and handle trouble when it comes. But the other stuff—" He shook his head. "I could use a partner, someone smart, someone who knows how to plan and organize." She stared at him. "You don't know me. You met me an hour ago digging a grave. I know you loved your brother enough to dig his grave by hand in the middle of the night. I know you're strong enough to see injustice and call it by name. I know you're brave enough to stand alone when you have to." Austin met her eyes. "That tells me plenty. Are you offering me a job, Mr. Blake? I'm offering you a partnership. And I'm offering you a place to go that isn't California if you want it. There's land about 30 miles north of here, near the edge of the Ruby Mountains. It's rough country, but there's water and grass. I was going to file a claim this week." Eleanor's mind was reeling. This was insane. People didn't just partner up with strangers. But then again, what did she have to lose? Thomas was dead. She had no family, no ties, no future in Unionville. And despite the strangeness of the situation, there was something about Austin Blake that felt solid, trustworthy. "I don't know anything about cattle," she said slowly. "You can learn. I don't know anything about keeping books or planning supplies or dealing with lawyers. You can teach me. This is crazy. Probably." He smiled for the first time, and it transformed his face, made him look younger and more open. "But sometimes crazy is what works." Eleanor looked back at her brother's grave, at the cairn of stones marking it. Thomas had died because he'd been caught in someone else's games, because he'd been powerless and alone. She'd been powerless too, unable to help him, unable to protect him. But maybe that could change. Maybe with a partner, with someone to stand beside, she could build something different. Something better. "I'll need to go back to town, get my things," she said. "I'll go with you. Crane might make trouble." Austin's expression hardened. "Let him try." They rode into Unionville just as the sun was cresting the eastern mountains, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. Eleanor rode behind Austin on his roan gelding, her arms wrapped around his waist for balance. She could feel the strength in him, the steadiness, and something about it made her feel safer than she'd felt in months. The hotel where she'd been working was a 2-story frame building on the main street, weathered gray by sun and wind. Eleanor had a tiny room on the second floor, barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, but it had been hers. She'd paid for it with her wages, kept it clean and neat, made it into a refuge. Austin waited outside while she went up to pack. It didn't take long. She'd never accumulated much, and what she had fit easily into a carpetbag and a small trunk. Her best dress, her everyday clothes, her mother's Bible, a daguerreotype of her family taken before her parents died. A few books, some sewing supplies, Thomas's pocket watch that she'd taken from his body before wrapping him. She was carrying the carpetbag down the narrow stairs when she ran into Mrs. Henderson, the hotel owner's wife. The older woman's eyes went wide. "Eleanor, we heard about your brother. Such a tragedy. The funeral is this afternoon, you know." "There won't be a funeral," Eleanor said quietly. "I've already buried him." "What? But the arrangements were made. The minister was going to say words. Everyone was expecting. I buried him last night, Mrs. Henderson, somewhere clean and quiet away from this town." Eleanor kept her voice level, polite. "I'm leaving Unionville. I'll need to settle my account." Mrs. Henderson's expression shifted from surprise to calculation. "Well, you'll lose your deposit, of course, and there's the matter of leaving without proper notice." Eleanor had expected this. She pulled out her small leather purse and counted out bills. "This should cover everything, with extra for the inconvenience." The older woman took the money, counted it, then pocketed it with a sniff. "I suppose you're off to try your luck somewhere else. Girls like you always think there's something better waiting. Girls like me." Eleanor kept her voice even, but there was steel underneath. "Girls without family, without protection, without prospects." Mrs. Henderson's tone was pious, judgmental. "You should have married when you had the chance. Now you'll end up in some brothel in Virginia City or San Francisco. Mark my words." Eleanor wanted to slap her. Instead, she picked up her carpetbag and said, "Goodbye, Mrs. Henderson. I hope your life brings you whatever it is you deserve." She walked out with her head high, but her hands were shaking. Austin was waiting by his horse, and when he saw her face, his jaw tightened. "Trouble? Nothing I couldn't handle." She handed him the carpetbag, then went back for her trunk. Between the two of them, they got everything secured on the horse, though it made for awkward packing. "We'll need to get you a horse," Austin said, "and supplies before we head out. I have money, not a lot, but enough to contribute. We'll pool our resources, figure out what we need." He glanced down the street toward the larger buildings at the center of town. "That Crane's Saloon." Eleanor followed his gaze to the Red Queen, a two-story structure with a false front and painted windows. "That's it. Why? Just want to know where trouble lies." Austin helped her mount, then swung up behind her. "Let's get what we need and get out of here." They went to the general store first, where Eleanor bought trail clothes, boots, and a wide-brimmed hat suitable for desert sun. Austin supplied food, cooking gear, tools, rope, ammunition. The store owner, a nervous man named Jessup, kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in. "You folks planning a journey?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Just need supplies," Austin said neutrally. "Well, if you're planning to stake land up north, you should know that some of the territory up there is claimed, or will be soon. Mr. Crane has interests that direction." Austin's expression didn't change. "Does he now?" "Just thought you should know. Wouldn't want there to be any misunderstandings." Eleanor felt a chill run through her. Crane already knew they were leaving, already knew where they were planning to go. The man had eyes and ears everywhere. They finished their purchases and loaded everything onto a pack mule that Austin bought from the livery. He also bought Eleanor a horse, a sturdy bay mare with intelligent eyes and a calm disposition. The mare's name was Sadie, the livery owner said, and she was sound and trail broke. By mid-morning they were ready to leave. Eleanor changed into her new trail clothes in the hotel room one last time, then met Austin at the edge of town. She wore denim pants, a sturdy cotton shirt, boots, and the wide-brimmed hat. Her hair was braided down her back. She looked nothing like the proper hotel maid she'd been yesterday, and everything like someone ready for a new life. "You look like a pioneer woman," Austin said, and there was approval in his voice. "I feel like I'm about to ride off the edge of the earth." "Maybe we are," he smiled. "But at least we're doing it together." They rode north out of Unionville, leaving the town and its shadows behind. The desert opened up before them, vast and beautiful and harsh. Eleanor had never been outside of towns before, never spent more than a day or two traveling between settlements. Now she was heading into wilderness with a man she'd known for less than 12 hours, to start a life she couldn't even fully imagine. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something that might have been hope. The journey to the land Austin had scouted took 2 days. They traveled through high desert country, following old game trails and dry washes, camping at night under stars so bright and numerous they looked like diamond dust scattered across black velvet. Austin was a patient teacher, showing Eleanor how to unsaddle and care for her horse, how to set up camp efficiently, how to build a fire that would burn hot but not waste fuel. At night, they sat on opposite sides of the fire, talking. Austin told her about growing up on a small farm in Ohio, about how his parents had died in a barn fire when he was 16, about working his way west doing whatever jobs he could find until he landed on a ranch in Montana and discovered he had a gift for handling cattle. "I worked for a man named Samuel Barrett," Austin said, staring into the flames. "Best cattleman in Montana and the best man I ever knew. He taught me everything. How to read the weather, how to know what a herd needs, how to build something that lasts. When he died last year, he left me a small inheritance. Not much, but enough to make a start. He must have thought highly of you. He didn't have children of his own. I think maybe I was the son he wished he'd had." Austin poked at the fire with a stick. "He always said the key to success wasn't working harder than everyone else. It was working smarter and having people you could trust." Eleanor understood what he was saying. "You're taking a risk, trusting me. You're taking a risk too." He looked at her across the flames. "But I don't think either of us is the kind to take foolish risks." She told him about her own life, about growing up in Missouri with parents who'd run a bakery, about learning to read and cipher because her mother believed education was important for girls as well as boys. About Thomas, who'd been sweet and gentle and completely unprepared for the brutal realities of mining towns and men like Victor Crane. "He should never have come west," Eleanor said. "He was too soft for it, but he wanted to take care of me, wanted to prove he could be the man of the family." Her voice caught, and it killed him. "It wasn't the West that killed him," Austin said quietly. "It was one man's cruelty. Don't confuse the two." On the second evening, they reached the land Austin had chosen. It was in a wide valley at the base of the Ruby Mountains, where a creek ran year-round and grass grew thick in the bottomlands. To the east, the mountains rose up in jagged peaks still streaked with snow. To the west, the valley opened onto rolling hills that stretched toward the desert. "It's beautiful," Eleanor said, and meant it. "It's rough," Austin said, "but it has good bones. Water, grass, shelter from the worst winds. We can build something here." They made camp near the creek, and in the morning they rode the boundaries of the land Austin intended to claim. It was over 300 acres, much of it grazing land, some of it forested with pine and juniper. There was a spot near the creek where the ground was level and protected by a curve of hills that would be perfect for buildings. "We'll need to file the claim in the nearest land office," Eleanor said, thinking practically. "That's probably in Ruby Valley or maybe even back in Elko. We'll need to document improvements, prove we're working the land." Austin nodded. "Which means we need to start building right away. A cabin first, then corrals, a barn. I can do most of the work, but I'll need help." "I can help." He looked at her doubtfully. "It's hard work, heavy work." "I dug my brother's grave, didn't I?" Eleanor met his eyes. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Blake, and I'm not afraid of hard work." "Austin," he said, "if we're going to be partners, you should call me Austin." "Austin," she agreed. "And I'm Eleanor." They spent the next weeks in constant motion, working from dawn until dark to establish their claim. Austin felled trees and trimmed them into logs while Eleanor cleared the building site, pulled rocks, and prepared the ground. Together, they began constructing a cabin, one log at a time, chinked with mud and grass. It was back-breaking work, and Eleanor fell into her bedroll each night so exhausted she could barely move, but she also felt alive in a way she never had before. Her body grew stronger, her hands more capable. She learned to use an axe to handle a saw to notch logs so they fit together tightly. Austin was endlessly patient, showing her techniques, praising her progress, working alongside her as a true partner rather than as a boss. They talked while they worked, long conversations that ranged from the practical to the philosophical. Eleanor discovered that Austin had a dry sense of humor and a thoughtful mind. He discovered that Eleanor had a gift for solving problems and a determination that matched his own. Slowly, the cabin took shape. It was small, just one room with a loft, but it was solid and well made. They built a stone fireplace at one end, fitted a real glass window that Austin had brought from Unionville, hung a door that closed tight against the wind. Eleanor sewed curtains from spare canvas, made rope beds, stuffed mattresses with grass and sage. When the cabin was finished, they stood back and looked at what they'd created. "It's ours," Eleanor said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Actually ours." "The first of many things we'll build," Austin said. He turned to her. "I couldn't have done this without you, you know that, right?" "You could have. It just would have taken longer." "No, Eleanor, I mean it. You've worked as hard as any man I've ever known, and you've brought things to this partnership that I never could have on my own. The planning, the organization, the way you see 3 steps ahead." He paused. Samuel Barrett used to say that success wasn't about being good at everything. It was about finding people whose strengths balanced your weaknesses. "You balance me." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. Over the weeks of working together, she'd become increasingly aware of Austin as more than just a partner. She noticed the way his hair curled when it was damp with sweat, the strength in his hands, the kindness in his eyes. She noticed how safe she felt with him, how right it felt to work side by side, to share this dream, but she pushed those feelings down. This was a business partnership, nothing more. Austin had never indicated he saw her as anything other than a capable partner. And she wasn't about to complicate their arrangement by introducing romantic notions. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means a lot." They moved into the cabin that night, Eleanor taking the loft and Austin sleeping on the ground floor. It felt strange at first, living in such close quarters with a man who wasn't family. But it also felt natural, as if they'd been doing this for years rather than weeks. The next phase was building corrals and starting to acquire cattle. Austin made a trip to the nearest ranch and bought 10 head of young cows and a bull, paying with most of his remaining money. They were foundation stock, he explained, the beginning of their herd. With good management and luck, those 10 cows would produce calves, and those calves would grow, and within a few years they'd have a sizable herd. "What about predators?" Eleanor asked, watching the cattle graze in their new pasture. "Won't wolves or mountain lions go after them?" "They'll try," Austin said. "That's why we'll need to keep watch, especially at night. And we'll need dogs eventually, good cattle dogs that can help move the herd and alert us to danger. More things to buy, more things to save for," he smiled at her. "We're going to make this work, Eleanor." "I can feel it." She wanted to believe him, but she couldn't shake the memory of Jessup's words back in Unionville about Crane having interests in this direction. What if the man decided to cause trouble? What if he came after them the way he'd gone after Thomas? As if reading her thoughts, Austin said, "You're worried about Crane, aren't you?" "Some," he admitted. But we're not in Unionville anymore. We're on our own land doing our own work. He has no claim on us." He had no legitimate claim on Thomas either. That didn't stop him. Austin was quiet for a moment, then he said, "If trouble comes, we'll deal with it together. That's what partners do." Trouble came on a bright October afternoon, 6 weeks after they'd started building their ranch. Eleanor was in the cabin, working on the books she'd started keeping to document their expenses and progress, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She went to the window and saw 5 men riding up the trail from the south. She recognized Victor Crane immediately. He was a big man, well dressed in a dark suit and a flat-crowned hat, riding a showy black gelding. The 4 men with him were clearly hired muscle, wearing guns and hard expressions. Eleanor's heart began to pound. Austin was out checking the cattle in the far pasture. She was alone. She grabbed the rifle Austin had taught her to shoot, checked that it was loaded, and stepped out onto the porch just as the men rode into the yard. Crane pulled up his horse and smiled, but there was nothing friendly in it. "Well now, Miss Lancaster. Fancy meeting you out here in the middle of nowhere." Eleanor kept the rifle pointed at the ground, but her hands were steady on it. "This is private property, Mr. Crane. You're trespassing." "Trespassing?" he laughed. "That's a strong word for unclaimed land. The claim was filed 3 weeks ago in Elko. This is legally deeded land, and you have no business here." Crane's smile faded. "I heard you'd taken up with some drifter cowboy, thought you'd play rancher. That's adorable, truly. But you should know that I had plans for this valley. Plans that don't include squatters. We're not squatters. We're landowners." Eleanor lifted the rifle slightly. "And I'll ask you one more time to leave." One of Crane's men moved his hand toward his gun, but Crane held up a hand. "Now, let's not be hasty. I'm here to make a reasonable offer. I'll buy your claim, pay you double what you paid for it. You and your cowboy can take the money and start fresh somewhere else, somewhere safer. This land isn't for sale. Everything's for sale, Miss Lancaster. It's just a matter of price." His voice hardened. "You should think carefully before refusing me. I'd hate for you to have an accident like your brother did. Mining accidents are tragic, but ranch accidents, those can be even worse. A fire, maybe. A stampede. So many things can go wrong when people are in over their heads." Eleanor's hands tightened on the rifle, but before she could respond, she heard another horse approaching fast. Austin rode into the yard at a gallop, pulling up his roan between Eleanor and Crane's men. His own rifle was drawn, held with casual competence. "Miss Lancaster said this is private property," Austin said, his voice level but hard. "That means you men need to turn around and leave. Now." Crane studied him with calculating eyes. "You must be the partner. Austin Blake, isn't it? I hear you've got a little money saved, some big dreams about building a ranch." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Let me give you some advice, Blake. This territory is harder than you think. Most men who try to make it on their own end up broken or dead. The smart ones take help when it's offered." "I don't need your help." "You sure about that?" "Because from where I'm sitting, you've got one small cabin, a handful of cattle, and no friends within 50 miles. I, on the other hand, have resources. Men, connections." He gestured expansively. "I could make your life very easy or very hard. Your choice." Austin's expression didn't change. "I've met men like you before, Crane. Men who think power means pushing others around, taking what doesn't belong to them, and I've seen where they end up. Oh, where's that? Alone, hated, usually dead." Austin shifted his rifle slightly. "Now you've had your say. Time to leave." For a long moment, nobody moved. The tension was thick enough to cut, and Eleanor could feel her pulse hammering in her throat. If shooting started, they were outnumbered 5-2. Even if she and Austin were both good shots, the odds weren't in their favor. Finally, Crane laughed and gathered his reins. "You've got spirit, Blake, I'll give you that, but spirit only takes a man so far." He looked at Eleanor. "And you, Miss Lancaster, I'm disappointed. I thought you were smarter than this. Guess your brother wasn't the only foolish one in the family." Eleanor felt rage flare hot in her chest, but Austin spoke before she could. "Leave, now, while you still can." Crane wheeled his horse around, and his men followed suit. They rode out at a canter, dust rising behind them. Austin and Eleanor stood watching until they were out of sight over the ridge. Only then did Eleanor realize she was shaking. The rifle suddenly felt impossibly heavy, and she lowered it carefully. Austin dismounted and came to her side. "You did good," he said quietly. "You didn't back down, didn't show fear. I was terrified. Being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means doing what needs to be done anyway." He took the rifle from her gently. "Come on, let's get inside." In the cabin, Austin made coffee while Eleanor sat at the table, trying to stop her hands from trembling. The confrontation had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Seeing Crane again, hearing him threaten her, mention Thomas, it had brought everything back. "He killed my brother," she said when Austin set a cup of coffee in front of her, "and he's going to get away with it. Maybe." Austin sat across from her. "Or maybe not. Men like Crane always overreach eventually, always push too hard, and when they do, people push back." "Who's going to push back? Everyone in Unionville is afraid of him." "Not everyone, and we're not in Unionville anymore." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Eleanor, I want you to listen to me. I'm not going to let him hurt you. I'm not going to let him drive us off this land. We've worked too hard, built too much. This is ours, and we're going to keep it." His hand was warm and strong over hers, and Eleanor felt something shift inside her. This wasn't just about the land anymore, wasn't just about building a ranch. This was about Austin, about what was growing between them, about the way her heart jumped every time he smiled at her, the way she felt safe when he was near. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. "You could have had a partner who didn't come with enemies. Someone who wasn't going to bring trouble to your door." Austin was quiet for a moment, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a gesture that might have been unconscious. "You want the truth? Always. When I found you that night, digging your brother's grave, I saw someone who was alone but not broken, someone who was grieving but still fighting, someone with courage and strength and loyalty." He met her eyes, "And I thought that's the kind of person I want beside me, not just for business. For everything." Eleanor's breath caught. "Austin, I know this is complicated. I know we started as partners, and I don't want to do anything that makes you uncomfortable. But I need you to know that somewhere along the way, these past weeks, working beside you, building this place with you, you became more to me than a business partner." He squeezed her hand gently. "You became the person I think about when I wake up in the morning. The person I want to share every success with, every challenge. The person I could imagine building a whole life with, not just a ranch." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes, but they weren't tears of grief this time. They were something else entirely. "I feel the same way. I've been trying not to, trying to keep things professional, but I can't help it. When you're near, I feel like I can breathe. When you're not, I miss you." Austin stood, came around the table, and pulled her to her feet. For a moment they just stood there, facing each other, his hands holding hers. Then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he leaned down and kissed her. It was gentle and careful, a question more than a demand. Eleanor answered by leaning into him, by letting herself feel all the emotions she'd been holding back. The kiss deepened, and she felt his arms go around her, felt herself wrapped in his warmth and strength. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Austin rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for weeks. Why didn't you? Didn't want to presume. Didn't want to risk losing the partnership if you didn't feel the same, he smiled. Turns out I was worrying for nothing. We still have to be careful, Eleanor said, practical even in the midst of emotional upheaval. We're not married. If anyone found out we were living here together, unmarried and alone, my reputation would be destroyed. Then marry me. Eleanor pulled back to look at him. What? Marry me, Eleanor. Not for propriety, though that's a good reason, but because I want you to. Because I want to build this life with you as my wife, not just my partner. Because when I think about the future, every version of it has you in it. He cupped her face in his hands. I know it's fast. I know we've only known each other a few weeks, but some things you just know deep down. This is one of them. Eleanor's heart was racing. This was insane, even more insane than partnering with a stranger. But Austin was right. Some things you just knew. And she knew with absolute certainty that she loved this man, that she wanted the life he was offering. That together they could face whatever came. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Austin's face split into a grin so wide and genuine it made him look boyish. He picked her up and spun her around, both of them laughing. When he set her down, he kissed her again. And this time there was joy in it, and promise, and the beginning of everything. They rode to Ruby Valley the next morning, a small settlement with a church and a traveling minister. The minister, a kindly older man named Reverend Walsh, agreed to marry them that afternoon. There were no guests, no fancy clothes, no celebration. Just Eleanor in her best dress, Austin in his cleanest shirt, and two witnesses pulled in from the general store. The ceremony was simple and short. They exchanged vows, exchanged rings that Austin bought from the general store, plain silver bands that nonetheless felt precious. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Austin kissed Eleanor with such tenderness that she felt her eyes fill with tears. I promise, he whispered against her lips, to build a life with you that honors the courage you showed me that first night, to stand beside you always, to be worthy of your trust. I promise, Eleanor whispered back, to be your partner in all things. To work beside you, fight beside you, build beside you, to love you with everything I have. They rode back to their ranch as husband and wife, and that night, in the cabin they'd built together, they truly became one. Austin was gentle and patient, making sure Eleanor's first time was full of care and tenderness. And Eleanor discovered that intimacy with someone you loved was nothing like the clinical descriptions she'd heard, nothing like the dire warnings. It was beautiful and overwhelming and right. Afterward, lying in Austin's arms in the loft, listening to his heart beat under her cheek, Eleanor felt a peace she hadn't known since before her parents died. She'd found a home, a partner, a love, and she was going to fight to keep it. The next months brought both challenges and joys. Winter came to the Ruby Valley, bringing snow and bitter cold. Austin and Eleanor worked together to keep the cattle fed, to maintain the cabin, to survive the harsh season. They learned to read each other's moods, to work in harmony, to support each other through the hard times. They also learned each other in more intimate ways, their love deepening as they navigated married life. Austin proved to be an affectionate husband, always ready with a touch, a kiss, a word of encouragement. Eleanor discovered depths of passion in herself she hadn't known existed, and nights in the loft became a time of connection and joy. By spring, their herd had grown. 3 of the cows had calved, producing healthy offspring. Austin and Eleanor worked together to brand the calves, to move the herd to fresh pasture, to begin building a larger barn. The ranch was thriving, but so was the threat from Victor Crane. They heard through the occasional traveler who stopped at their ranch that Crane had been buying up land throughout the region, consolidating power, pushing out anyone who wouldn't sell. There were rumors of violence, of mysterious fires, of settlers who'd packed up and left in the night. "He's building an empire," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. She was mending a shirt, her hands busy while her mind worked. "And he wants our land as part of it." "Then he's going to be disappointed," Austin said. He was oiling leather, maintaining their tack. "Because we're not leaving. What if he sends more men? What if he tries to burn us out? Then we rebuild, and we make sure there are consequences." Austin set down the leather and looked at her. "Eleanor, I need you to understand something. I'm not a violent man. I don't go looking for fights. But I will protect what's mine. I will protect you. And if that means standing against Crane and his men, then that's what I'll do." Eleanor set down her mending and moved to sit beside him. "I don't want you to die for this land. I don't plan to, but I'm not going to live in fear either." He pulled her close. "We're going to be smart. We're going to make friends with our neighbors, build alliances. We're going to make sure that if Crane comes after us, people notice, people care." Over the next months, they did exactly that. They made trips to the surrounding ranches, introduced themselves, offered help when it was needed. They found that most of their neighbors were decent people, families trying to make a living in hard country, people who were also wary of Crane's expanding influence. Among their new friends were the Johnsons, a family who ran a sheep operation about 10 miles to the east. Despite the traditional animosity between cattlemen and sheepmen, Austin and Martin Johnson got along well, recognizing in each other the same stubborn determination to succeed. Martin's wife, Sarah, became a particular friend to Eleanor, offering advice on everything from cooking to preserving food to dealing with the isolation of ranch life. "It gets lonely sometimes," Sarah admitted one afternoon when she'd ridden over to visit. The two women were working in the garden Eleanor had planted, pulling weeds and harvesting vegetables. "Especially in winter, when we're snowed in and it's just us and the children. Martin's a good man, but he's not much for talking." "Austin talks," Eleanor said, smiling. "Sometimes I wish he'd talk less when I'm trying to concentrate on the books," Sarah laughed. "You're lucky you two get along so well. Some couples out here, they end up barely speaking after a few years. The isolation either brings you together or tears you apart." "We work well together," Eleanor said. "And I think going through hard things together, right from the start, gave us a strong foundation. I heard you two met in unusual circumstances." Eleanor had told a carefully edited version of the story, leaving out the details about Thomas's murder. "We did. Austin helped me when I needed it most. I'll never forget that." By summer, Eleanor realized she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, a missed monthly course, morning sickness, a tenderness in her breasts. When she was certain, she told Austin one evening after supper. He went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Are you sure?" "As sure as I can be. I think I'm about 3 months along. The baby should come in late fall or early winter." A smile spread across Austin's face, slow and wondering. "We're going to have a baby." "We are." Eleanor felt a surge of joy mixed with fear. "I'm scared, Austin. Childbirth is dangerous, especially out here, and I don't know anything about being a mother." Austin pulled her into his arms, holding her close. "You're the bravest person I know, Eleanor Blake. You'll be an amazing mother. And I'll be there every step of the way. We'll get Sarah Johnson to help, and we'll send for a doctor when the time comes. What if something goes wrong? Then we'll deal with it, together, like we deal with everything." He pulled back to look at her, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "This is good news, Eleanor. The best news. We're not just building a ranch anymore. We're building a family." Over the next months, as summer turned to fall, Eleanor's body changed to accommodate the growing life inside her. She continued working as long as she could, helping with the cattle, maintaining the garden, keeping the books. Austin became increasingly protective, trying to take on more of the heavy work, fretting whenever Eleanor seemed tired. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," Eleanor said with exasperation one afternoon when Austin tried to prevent her from carrying a bucket of water from the creek. "I know, but I worry. Worry less and help more." She handed him the bucket. "Sarah worked right up until her babies were born. Women have been doing this forever." But as her due date approached in November, Eleanor had to admit that she was nervous. They'd arranged for Sarah Johnson to come stay with them when the time came, and Martin had agreed to ride to Ruby Valley for the doctor. Everything was as prepared as it could be. The baby came on a cold November night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Eleanor woke to contractions, strong and regular, and knew immediately that this was it. Austin sent for Sarah, then paced the cabin like a caged wolf while Eleanor labored. Sarah arrived by dawn, bringing competence and calm. She settled Eleanor in the bed, helped her through the contractions, coached her breathing. Austin stayed nearby, holding Eleanor's hand when she needed it, being sent out when Sarah needed space to work. The labor was long and difficult. Hours passed, the pain building until Eleanor thought she couldn't bear it. But every time she felt like giving up, she thought of Thomas, of her parents, of everything she'd survived. She thought of Austin, of the life they'd built, of the future they were creating. And finally, as the sun was setting on the second day of labor, the baby came. A long final push and then a cry filled the cabin, lusty and strong. "It's a boy," Sarah said, wrapping the baby in clean cloths. "A big, healthy boy." She placed the baby in Eleanor's arms, and Eleanor looked down at her son's red, wrinkled face with wonder. He had dark hair like Austin's, and when he opened his eyes, they were blue, though Sarah said all babies had blue eyes at first. Austin came in, moving hesitantly as if afraid he might break something. When he saw Eleanor holding their son, his eyes filled with tears. "He's perfect," Austin whispered, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed. "You're perfect. I can't believe he's ours. What should we name him?" Eleanor asked. Austin thought for a moment, then said, Thomas Blake, after your brother." Eleanor felt her eyes fill with tears. "Are you sure? He should carry the name of someone brave, someone who tried to do the right thing even when it was hard." Austin reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand, marveling when little fingers wrapped around his. "Hello, Thomas. Welcome to the family." The months after Thomas's birth were the happiest and most exhausting of Eleanor's life. The baby was healthy but demanding, waking every few hours to nurse, needing constant care and attention. Eleanor learned to function on broken sleep, to nurse while doing other tasks, to recognize the different types of cries. Austin proved to be a devoted father. He would walk Thomas around the cabin at night when the baby was fussy, singing to him in a surprisingly good voice. He built a cradle with his own hands, carved toys, talked to his son constantly, even though the baby couldn't understand. "You're going to spoil him," Eleanor said one evening, watching Austin make funny faces at Thomas, who was lying on a blanket in front of the fire. "You can't spoil a baby by loving him," Austin replied. "Besides, he's too young to be spoiled. Ask me again when he's 2 and throwing tantrums." Winter that year was harsh, with heavy snows that kept them confined to the cabin for weeks at a time. But despite the isolation, or maybe because of it, the Blake family grew closer. They were a unit, a team, facing the world together. Spring brought new challenges. With a baby to care for, Eleanor couldn't work as much on the ranch. Austin hired a young man named Pete Garrett to help with the cattle and the heavy work. Pete was 18, eager and hardworking, and he quickly became part of their extended ranch family. It was Pete who brought them news that Victor Crane had been expanding his operations aggressively. He'd bought out 3 more ranches in the region, sometimes through legitimate purchases, sometimes through methods that weren't entirely clear. "Folks are getting nervous," Pete said one evening at supper. "Some are thinking about selling out while they still can." "What about the Johnsons?" Eleanor asked, bouncing Thomas on her knee. "They're holding on, but Martin says Crane's been making noise about sheep ruining the range, about how sheepmen don't belong in cattle country." Pete shook his head. "It's all nonsense. The Johnsons run a tight operation, and their sheep don't interfere with anybody." "It's just an excuse," Austin said. "Crane wants their land. He'll say whatever he needs to say to justify taking it." A week later, the Johnsons' barn burned down. Martin rode to the Blake Ranch in the middle of the night, his face smudged with soot, his eyes wild. "It was set," he told Austin and Eleanor as they sat around the kitchen table. Eleanor had made coffee, and Martin wrapped his hands around the cup as if he was freezing despite the warm spring night. "I saw the tracks, saw where someone had piled kindling against the walls. We lost the barn, lost most of our winter feed, lost 3 sheep that got trapped inside." "Did you report it to the sheriff?" Eleanor asked. "What sheriff?" "The closest law is in Unionville, and we all know who runs that town." Martin's voice was bitter. "Nobody's going to help us. Crane's making his move, and there's nothing we can do about it." Austin leaned forward. "Yes, there is. We can stand together. You, me, the other ranchers in the area. If Crane wants a fight, we'll give him one, but we'll do it smart." "What are you suggesting? A ranchers' association?" "We formalize it, make it official. We agree to watch each other's properties, to help rebuild when there's trouble, to stand witness when something happens. We document everything, keep records, make sure that if Crane or his men step out of line, there's proof." Austin's voice was firm. "And if we need to, we send those records to territorial authorities, to newspapers in California and back east. We make sure people know what's happening here." Martin looked skeptical. "You think that will stop him?" "I think it's better than doing nothing. And I think if we stand together, we're stronger than we are alone." Over the next weeks, Austin and Martin worked to organize their neighbors. They held a meeting at the Blake Ranch, and 14 families showed up, representing most of the independent ranchers in the region. Some were cattlemen, some were sheepmen, one family raised horses. But all of them were tired of living in fear. They formed the Ruby Valley Ranchers Association, elected Austin as president and Martin as vice president. They agreed on bylaws, on rules for mutual aid, on how to document incidents and protect each other. It was a start, a way of fighting back that didn't involve guns. But Crane didn't seem impressed. A month after the association formed, riders cut the Blake's fence and scattered their cattle. It took 3 days to round them all up, and they lost 2 calves to predators in the process. Austin documented the incident, took photographs of the cut fence, gathered statements from Pete who'd found the damage. He sent copies to the territorial governor's office, to the land office, to newspapers. Most ignored him. But one journalist from a San Francisco paper, a muckraker named Abigail Warner, took an interest. She rode out to the Ruby Valley to investigate, spent a week interviewing ranchers, documenting Crane's activities. Her article, when it was published, was scathing, detailing Crane's methods, naming names, calling for investigation. The article didn't stop Crane, but it made him more careful. The blatant attacks decreased, though the pressure remained. He continued buying up land, continued consolidating power, but he did it more subtly. Years passed. Thomas grew from a baby to a toddler to a little boy, bright and curious and bold. Eleanor gave birth to a daughter they named Alice, and then another boy they named James. The cabin expanded to include more rooms, and the ranch prospered despite the ongoing tension with Crane. Austin proved to be as devoted a father as he was a husband. He taught his children to ride, to care for animals, to work the land. He also taught them to read and write, with Eleanor's help, determined that his children would have the education he'd missed. Eleanor managed the business side of the ranch with skill, keeping meticulous records, managing their finances, negotiating contracts for their cattle. The ranch became known throughout the region as well-run and successful, a model for what could be achieved with hard work and determination. The Ranchers Association continued to function, providing support and protection for its members. Crane's influence remained, but it didn't grow, held in check by the solidarity of the independent ranchers. Then, in the spring when Thomas was 7, Alice was 5, and James was 3, everything changed. Victor Crane was found dead in his office at the Red Queen Saloon, shot twice in the chest. The killer was never identified, though there were plenty of suspects. Crane had made enemies throughout his career, and any number of people might have wanted him dead. With Crane gone, his empire collapsed. His various enterprises were sold off or abandoned. Some of his land was bought by the ranchers he tried to drive out, including the Blakes, who acquired the parcel adjacent to theirs, expanding their range significantly. The shadow that had hung over the Ruby Valley for years lifted. People could breathe easier, plan for the future without fear. On a warm summer evening, 10 years after the night Austin had found Eleanor digging her brother's grave, the Blake family sat on their porch watching the sunset. The house had grown over the years, expanding to accommodate their growing family and their growing prosperity. There were flower beds now, planted by Eleanor, and a tire swing hanging from an old cottonwood tree that Austin had rigged up for the children. Thomas, now a lanky boy of 10, was throwing a ball for their dog, a clever border collie named Scout. Alice was sitting on the steps, reading a book in the fading light. James was in Austin's lap, fighting sleep and losing. Eleanor sat beside her husband, her hand in his, feeling the contentment of a life well lived. They'd built something here, something that would last. Not just a ranch, but a legacy. Not just a business, but a home. "Do you ever think about that night?" Austin asked quietly. "The night we met, sometimes," Eleanor said. "I think about how alone I felt, how desperate, how certain I was that my life was essentially over. And now I know I was wrong. My life wasn't ending that night, it was beginning." She squeezed his hand. "You saved me, Austin, not just by helping me bury Thomas, but by giving me a reason to keep going, a purpose, a partnership that became so much more." "You saved me too," Austin said. "I was drifting before I met you. I had plans, sure, but no real direction. You gave me that. You gave me everything." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching their children play, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple. "I want to do something," Eleanor said. "For Thomas. My brother, I mean. I've been thinking about it for a while." "What did you have in mind?" "A scholarship. For young people in the area who want to get an education but can't afford it. We could call it the Thomas Lancaster Memorial Scholarship. Fund it from ranch profits, help kids who need a chance the way Thomas needed a chance." Austin smiled. "That's a perfect idea. He would have liked that. Would you mind? I know it means taking money away from the ranch, from our children's inheritance." "Our children will inherit more than money," Austin said, looking at Thomas, Alice, and James. "They'll inherit a legacy of standing up for what's right, of helping others, of building something meaningful. A scholarship in your brother's name fits perfectly with that." Over the next years, the Blake family continued to thrive. The ranch grew to become one of the most successful in the region. The scholarship fund helped dozens of young people get educations, some of whom went on to become teachers, doctors, lawyers, returning to serve their communities. Thomas grew into a young man who looked remarkably like his father, with the same steady demeanor and strong work ethic. Alice proved to have her mother's head for business and her father's love of the land. James was the dreamer of the family, always reading, always asking questions, always wondering what lay beyond the horizon. When Austin and Eleanor's 25th wedding anniversary came around, their children threw them a party at the ranch. The entire Ruby Valley turned out, along with friends from surrounding areas. There was food and music and dancing and stories told about the early days, about building the ranch, about standing up to Victor Crane, about all the challenges overcome. Late in the evening, Austin and Eleanor slipped away from the party, walking hand in hand to the spot by the creek where their cabin had first stood. The original cabin was still there, maintained as a reminder of their beginnings, though they now lived in a much larger house. 25 years, Eleanor said, looking up at the stars. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes it feels like forever. The best 25 years of my life, Austin said. He pulled her close, and even after all this time the embrace felt as right as it had that first night. I love you, Eleanor Blake. I've loved you from the moment I saw you digging that grave, refusing to quit, refusing to give up. I loved your strength then, and I love everything you've become since. I love you too, Eleanor said. You gave me a life I never could have imagined. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself, and that was the greatest gift of all. They kissed there by the creek, with the sound of music and laughter drifting from the house, with their children and grandchildren and friends celebrating nearby, with the land they'd built together stretching out around them in the moonlight. The years continued to pass. Austin and Eleanor grew older together, their love deepening rather than fading with time. They became grandparents and then great-grandparents, watching their legacy extend into new generations. The ranch remained in the family, passed down to Thomas, who ran it with the same dedication his parents had shown. The Ruby Valley prospered, growing from a collection of isolated ranches into a true community. The Ranchers Association that Austin and Martin Johnson had founded became a model for other regions. The scholarship fund in Thomas Lancaster's name sent hundreds of young people to college over the decades. Eleanor wrote a book about their experiences, about building the ranch, about standing up to corruption, about the importance of community and partnership. It became required reading in schools throughout Nevada, teaching new generations about the courage and determination of the pioneers who'd built the West. When Austin passed away at the age of 82, surrounded by his family in the house he'd built, Eleanor held his hand and whispered the same promise she'd made on their wedding day. To love him always, to honor what they'd built together, to keep his memory alive. She lived another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, writing, gardening, and maintaining the ranch records with the same meticulous care she'd always shown. On quiet evenings, she would walk to the place where Thomas's grave lay, marked now by a proper stone that Austin had commissioned years ago. She would sit there and tell her brother about her life, about the family she'd built, about how that terrible night when he died had, in the strangest way, led to her salvation. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 85, in the same bed where she'd given birth to her children, in the house she'd helped build with her own hands. Her children buried her next to Austin, on a hillside overlooking the valley they'd claimed together. At her funeral, Thomas Blake, now a grandfather himself, spoke about his mother's legacy. He talked about her strength, her wisdom, her unwavering commitment to doing what was right. He talked about how she and his father had built not just a successful ranch, but a model for how people should treat each other, how communities should function, how love should endure. My mother used to tell me about the night she met my father, Thomas said to the assembled crowd. About how she was at her lowest point, digging her uncle's grave alone in the dark, certain that her life was over. And then my father rode up, took the shovel from her hands and said, "Tell me who we're burying." That simple act of help, of partnership, of solidarity, changed everything. It wasn't just about digging a grave. It was about refusing to let someone face their darkest moment alone. He looked out over the valley, at the ranch that had grown from two people and a dream into something that would last for generations. That's the legacy my parents left us. Not just this land, though that's precious. Not just their success, though we're grateful for it. But the knowledge that we're stronger together than we are alone. That love and partnership can overcome any obstacle. That courage isn't the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going despite it. The crowd dispersed eventually, but the Blake family remained, standing together on the hillside as the sun set over the Ruby Valley. They stood as Austin and Eleanor had stood so many times, watching the light paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson, watching the shadows stretch across the land they'd built, the legacy they'd created. And in that moment, with the wind whispering through the sage and the last light of day touching the stones that marked Austin and Eleanor's graves, it was possible to feel their presence still. Not gone, but transformed, woven into the land itself, into the family they'd created, into the community they'd helped build. The story that had begun with a desperate woman digging a grave in the darkness had become something beautiful, something lasting, something worth remembering. It was a story of love found in the most unlikely circumstances, of strength discovered in partnership, of a legacy built not on wealth or power, but on courage, determination, and an unwavering commitment to each other. It was a story of the American West, of the people who'd built it, of the dreams that had driven them and the love that had sustained them. It was a story that would be told for generations, passed down through the Blake family and beyond, a reminder that even in our darkest moments, help might be riding toward us through the darkness. And that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with a simple act of kindness, a moment of connection, a hand reached out in the night. Sometimes all it takes is someone willing to take the shovel and say, "Tell me who we're burying." The ranch continued for decades more, always in Blake hands, always run with the same principles that Austin and Eleanor had established. The valley prospered, the community thrived, and the story of the cowboy and the woman digging a grave became legend, a founding myth for the place and the people who called it home. Their love story became part of the landscape itself, as permanent as the mountains, as enduring as the desert, as constant as the stars.